Welcome to Between the Sheets, the non judgmental podcast where we're going to cover various sexual health and wellness topics. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Zwonitzer. I'm a urology and sexual health nurse practitioner, and I love helping my patients and listeners discover and develop their most satisfying sexual experiences. Between the Sheets is here to normalize the conversations about sexual health and cover everything from basic anatomy to the most taboo topics and everything in between. Real talk, real pleasure, one episode at a time. So come on, let's get between the sheets. This episode is sponsored by Boston Scientific and its educational website on erectile dysfunction, edcure.com. One study estimated that more than 50% of men over the age of 40 have some degree of erectile dysfunction, which can be frustrating and confusing. Go to edcure.com to find information on erectile dysfunction and treatment options, including long-term treatment options offered by Boston Scientific. Boston Scientific does not endorse any statements or opinions expressed during this episode. Welcome back to Between the Sheets. I have a repeat guest on today, and I am so excited to have Julia Satterlee back with us. She is a fabulous sexologist. She covers topics all over the place, and she just recently came out with a couple new programs that we're going to kind of talk through today because they are totally relevant topics to you listeners. So the first one that she has is called From Freeze to Flow, and it's all about parents and talking to our kids about sex. And who doesn't need help with that, because none of us were talked to about sex correctly. So we need some help in figuring that out, and Julia is going to help us with that today. She also came out with another program because she is such a fabulous sexologist, where she's helping long-term couples who are 50 plus and are ready to move from routine and disconnection to fulfillment, pleasure, and genuine desire without some awkwardness in between. So we may have time to get to that. Otherwise, Julia has already agreed to come back and talk to us about that. But today we're going to start by diving into talking to our kids about sex. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. I'm so excited to be here and talk about these topics. These are two of my favorite topics, even though they feel like sometimes they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. It really reflects my core beliefs that our sexuality is a part of our well-being and our wholeness from
Yeah.
birth to death in different ways. So excited to be here. Thank
Aw-
you.
Yes, and I agree. I mean, I think there's so many different layers to it, right? There's our own sexuality, there's what we teach our kids, there's what we experience with our partner. There's so many different levels. So I love that you explore various aspects of this. And for me, my kids are young adults. My kids are, almost 18 and 20 at this point. Their birthdays are in a couple months. So that's why I say almost. But, I'm kind of on like the getting past where my teaching is done. But there were some really awkward moments. There are still some awkward moments when we're talking. So let's start with younger kids, though, because I did not have help when my kids were little. And I think I did okay. I think I tried my best. But what are some things that, like, when should we start talking to kids about not necessarily like intercourse, but sexuality and pleasure and things like that? What age do we start talking about that with?
Great question. Such a great question. And I think this is where I really get to talk about what sexuality means, because we throw around the word sex all the time, but what does that really mean? Are we talking to little kids about intercourse? No. Right? That's totally not what's happening. That's not what I recommend. That's not what any professionals are recommending. Like, explain in this way to your 3-year-old. No, absolutely not. When we're talking about sex, when I use the word sex as a sexologist, I'm often referring to all kinds of different aspects of sexuality. And so that can mean everything from our body image, our understanding of our gender and gender expression, which is not just like, are you cisgender or are you transgender? That's like everything about how we feel about being a girl or a boy or a man or a woman, everything about, right? All kinds of aspects of who we are as people and our health, our bodies, our bodily functions, like all of that essentially ties into our sexuality and things that we could be talking about at age appropriate levels with children, right? So clearly, if we're talking about toddlers or, a 4-year-old even, we're not talking about major stuff. We're not talking about the same stuff that we're talking about with late teens, for example. with a 2-year-old, we're talking about naming your body parts, right? Like, oh, yes, that is your penis. That is, hopefully I can say that on this podcast.
Yes, please do.
That is your vulva. That is,
Yes.
right? Like, yes, we wash it like this. A great spot to mention what their body parts are called is in the bath, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bath time, shower time, whatever you're having with kiddos, because we want to make it feel not bad,
Right.
right? We want to make it feel normal. You're not coming up with weird names for their elbow, usually, right? Or their
Yes.
nose or
Right.
any other body. And so this is an area where we can start immediately with little children talking about basic stuff like body parts. And this is part of what will help protect them
Mm-hmm.
from sexual abuse and things like that in the future as well. So when
And
we
being
make
understood
this something that's
correctly.
not taboo,
Yes.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, and being understood correctly. I know when you're saying protect the kids, like I have heard stories where the abuse has continued because the child is saying, Uncle so and so touched my whatever, and it's a weird name that somebody doesn't get. And what they're actually trying to say is they touched my penis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly. That's a great example. So, little kids, you're talking about basic stuff like body parts, just not making it weird. This is a private part. Yes.
Yeah.
Other people don't touch this part except, family in the shower to bathe you, things
Mm-hmm.
like that. And talking about, when they're a little bit older, we start talking about friendship
Mm,
because talking about friendship is the way that we build into talking about friendship and family really is the
okay.
way that we build into relationships what's going to be teen
Yeah.
relationships and things like that which starts with friendships and family relationships.
That's interesting. I like that idea. So, talking your kid through, how to be a good friend, what's appropriate in a friendship, creating boundaries where you're not spending tons of time with that friend, but you have time for yourself, things like that too. You're basically setting the stage then for those deeper conversations as they get older.
And you're teaching them already about boundaries and
Mm.
consent
Yeah.
from a really young age, right? When you're having the conversation with your kids about what game they're going to play with their friend and their friend trying to pressure them into some game that they don't feel like playing. And maybe they said yes, but they changed their mind
Mm-hmm.
partway through. It wasn't a fun game, right? Like those are conversations that translate to consent later
Yeah.
on. You
Yeah.
don't have to do things that make you feel uncomfortable. Even if you said yes, you can change your mind. Right?
Yes.
Mind
Right.
blowing
Yeah.
that people had told that as children.
Right. No, instead, when we were kids, it was you will hug grandma, you will hug Aunt Susie, you will, all of these things. And now I think it's better. We're getting there and we're allowing kids to say, I don't want to hug, but I'll be polite. I'll say hello. Maybe I'll shake your hand or give you a high five or something that I feel comfortable with, but I'm not forced to hug you. I'm not forced to say, I love you. Things like that, I think is really important in those boundary setting.
And the pushback that I get, I love that you brought up hugging grandma because sometimes I hear pushback about this that is, it's coming from a good place
Mhm.
of adults being worried that their kids are going to think they don't have to do anything, right? And, or that they're going to hurt everybody's feelings, just be really rude to everybody. And that's not what we're advocating for here,
Right.
right? And so I want to clarify that, for example, having a conversation that, yes, you get to decide whether you want to continue playing dodgeball or not is
Yeah.
different from, no, you do have to take a shower. Right?
Right.
Like, these are different conversations. There are things that, yes, we have to do that we don't want to do.
Yeah.
That is a part of life. That's not what anybody's advocating for, is like this free reign, do whatever you want sort of
Yes.
conversation. That's different. But I think that sometimes people get into this kind of black and white thinking,
Mm.
well, if I give my kid autonomy in this realm, then they're going to think they're autonomous in the whole world and they don't
Right.
have to listen to me. No, 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 no. That's not how this works. It's okay. Even little kids can start to understand some basic distinctions there
Hmm.
between like, this is for your health or safety, or like, this is
Right.
for your well being. This is different in this way.
Yeah.
Or with grandma, right? It's a, okay, if you don't want to hug grandma, that's fine. Can you shake her hand? Can
Hmm.
you greet her with this type of verbal greeting? What can you do to be
Right.
respectful, to show love that's not violating your bodily autonomy, essentially?
Yeah, and you think about, like, kids who are 18 months, 2 years, they do that by screaming and yelling and pushing away, and we're all like, "Oh, they're just so little, it's okay, they still love you, grandma, whatever." And we allow them to do that because they're essentially throwing a fit because that's the only way they know how to communicate at that age. So why don't we give the same respect to a 5 and 6-year-old who doesn't feel comfortable and says, "I don't wanna hug grandma when I get there." Okay, that's fine. What are you comfortable with? Are you comfortable with giving her a high five? Are you comfortable sitting next to her on the couch and maybe just letting her pat your leg and saying, "Hi, honey, how's it going?" with a little pat on the leg or something like that? What are you comfortable with when we get to grandma's house? And maybe that even has to happen where you have that conversation with your mom or dad before you even get there. Hey, we're not in a hugging mood today. Don't push it. This is where we're at. You know, a simple text that says, "Hey, we're not in a hugging mood today. Don't push it. Like, we're going to just do a high five when we get there." And then grandma and grandpa are already prepared. They know, all right, cool. We're going to do a high five, make everybody feel comfortable. And maybe by the time it's time to leave, little Tommy is going to feel comfortable enough to give you a hug goodbye. We don't know.
Right, right. Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great solution that helps prepare everybody too.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it just comes back to what you're doing with your program and educating because it would be very difficult for me in the way that I grew up when my kids were little to have said that to my mom, right? So I think a lot of what you're doing now by teaching those of us that are parents, especially parents of little kids, to get these tools to be better in teaching these things to their own kids, that then they can teach it to their parents. And then the parents can be better grandparents and things like that. So I think what you're doing is just phenomenal in resetting that bar for all of us.
Thank you so much. That's so lovely to hear. Especially, I come from a sex education background that started really early. It got started as a teenager in a peer education program, teaching other teens about sexual health
Mm,
and wellness. I'm a mom myself and have been for a while. I am pretty far from my teen years, but since then I've worked with teens in a similar program
mm,
as well. And so I've really been able to come full circle and see, what this looked
mhm,
like for me growing up to not have this kind of education.
mhm,
And then as a teen to have some education, right? I did
mhm,
get especially realistic tidbits, facts about bodies and,
mhm.
reproduction and things like that. But I still didn't get the kind of sex positive
Sure.
information and, values exploration that I really needed at the time. And that
Yeah.
is what really makes the difference for people. And that's what I've most tried to come across with in this program is understanding that it is so much about how
Mm,
we present this information, how we talk about this, what emotions, beliefs, values, and attitudes we are sharing with our children.
mhm.
That part of it is so much more important than just looking up facts or giving them a book. Like so
Yeah.
many parents I knew maybe handed a book or
Uh,
left a book on the bed for their kids, like, here's the birds and the bees.
right.
Or maybe they had to talk about like how sex works and things like how intercourse works. They didn't
Yeah.
even talk about other
Right.
aspects of sex. It was like,
No.
here's how intercourse and pregnancy work. Good luck with your life,
Right.
right?
So true. It's so true.
And even when we're doing that, if we're giving facts, that's great. That's one step in the right direction. But we're still sending that message that this is not something we can talk about.
Mhm.
This is not something that's a reasonable topic. This is not something you can come to me about. This
Mm.
is not something that is like worthy of our time and conversation and worth me being uncomfortable. And I know that's not the message that parents listening to this podcast want to give their kids, right? I
Right.
know that's not the message that most parents want to give their kids. They want to be there for their kids.
Mhm.
They want to share not just information, but their values, their feelings.
Mhm.
And I think that that's so important. And the more that we see other parents doing this and getting through the awkwardness, recognizing that we don't have all the answers. We don't always,
Mhm.
know the best way to do it, but it's worth doing anyway.
Yeah.
That's where that magic happens. And that's what I try to support people with in this program.
Yeah, I think it's amazing because especially now, like when we were growing up, internet was a thing, but it was just starting and it wasn't as robust as it is now. And so not only are kids not getting great education through, the public school system, which none of us got great sex education through the school system either, but now they have porn at their fingertips. They have Reddit at their fingertips. They have all these other things where they're getting information that's not necessarily good quality information. Some of it's dangerous information. And if we can get parents the tools to give good discussions and take that awkwardness away, then we can help these kids get good quality education and information that they can actually use appropriately going forward.
Exactly, exactly. It's so, it's such an optimistic way to think that I appreciate it to think, and I've heard this from parents, right? Which is why I'm mentioning it, to think like, well, they're getting info in school and
Mhm.
now they can look this up, they can find all this information. And that's true. We can. There are some good sources on the internet of sex education. And I include a resource list in my program
Mm,
of places for folks to visit. There's places that are specific to, tweens and teens, and places that include parent education. There are some really great sources on the internet. Yes, we should be using the internet, but lots of adults, even much less
mhm,
teens, haven't learned which sources are good sources.
mhm.
How do I find accurate information? How do I find, right? Who's portraying this information?
Yeah.
Even if we're looking at studies, right? With research, data, even
Mhm.
that I've discovered through my teen that they're not learning in school how to really navigate looking at
Right.
data and resources and studies and who funded this study? Where did this
Mhm.
come from? So, working with them on those critical thinking skills and looking through resources together, let's find a good resource for this. Hey,
Mhm.
I don't have the answer right now. I don't know the best way to talk about this, but let's look it up together. Let's figure it out together. That's a totally different
Yeah.
universe from good luck with your life or, oh, it's
Right.
on the internet. Go find it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's so important. So, okay, so we set up the stage with like real little kids naming things correctly as they get a little bit older, allowing them boundaries, teaching them friendships. When do we kind of start talking about like actual sex stuff, like touching each other and when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate? When does that conversation start?
Fantastic question. And that's another huge part of what I talk about in the course is finding those moments
Mm,
when it's the right time to talk about these things. Because, we throw around the term age appropriate a lot, but what does that actually mean?
yeah.
Well, it requires you to be observing your child, for one,
Mm,
right? And asking them questions and really listening differently to
mm,
their questions and even inserting yourself a bit when they are not asking
mm,
questions. So, oof, a lot going on there. But essentially, we want to be responding to them in real time based on what we know about them and what we know is reasonable development for kids. And
mhm.
so I know that sounds like a lot. You're like, okay, Julia, that clarified nothing. It's okay. It's okay. Give me another second. But essentially, right, there are age groups. Like it's normal, for example, for an 8-year-old to be asking questions about words that they hear about
Mm,
sex and bodies and things like that. It's still
mhm.
not normal for an 8-year-old to be like mimicking some kind of adult sexual behavior,
Okay.
right? If you see something like that, like they're rubbing against a person in a way
Mm,
that looks like something maybe they've seen on porn, that's a sign that they've been exposed to different information that is not
Mhm.
age appropriate, right?
Got it. Yep.
So you want to be looking for certain things of like, ooh, that's outside of the bounds of normal. But it is normal for them to be curious, for them to be asking about bodies. And at 8, some people are even starting beginning stages of puberty. So you
Mm,
really need to be talking to them at that point about body changes, hormonal changes, right? Getting them prepared for periods
mhm.
potentially, or for what's happening with your penis, and is it standing up sometimes, and right, like things like that. So um as young as 8, we're already talking about puberty
Okay.
potentially, or starting talking about puberty. But you want to take a look at those general kind of what's normal, what's not at this age,
Mhm.
and but it's a lot more normal for kids to be really curious, essentially. And if your child, I know I brought up porn. I don't know, I'm like throwing a lot out there at
Yeah.
once. Slow me down as needed. Let's talk about porn in a second, as a matter of fact. So I know I threw that in there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's so much that we need to focus in on age appropriate, and I love that what you're saying, finding what's normal for that age group and what should be a red flag, because I think I don't have those little kids anymore. Mine are teenagers, but I have friends with little kids. I'm around little kids. And so I like knowing, wow, that's a 7-year-old shouldn't know that term or that link, that movement, that whatever. And to kind of pay attention to that kid a little bit more. Like, all right, let's just kind of watch what are their other interactions. Is it just that they were exposed to something that they saw and they're curious about it? Or is something happening to that little kid that we need to kind of hone in on and be aware of?
Absolutely, exactly. And that's the thing, right? Even if a kid is rubbing up against something with their genitals, that's actually normal,
Mhm.
right? That's totally normal. Even little kid sexual behavior, it's not sexual to them yet.
Right.
Small children naturally discover their genitals in the course of discovering their whole body, touching places.
Yep.
They're like, oh, this feels good. Probably rubbing against something for
Right.
many children of both genders. And so totally normal. That's not anything to be alarmed about. But
Mhm.
again, if they're doing something that looks more like really adult sexual
Mhm.
behavior, mimic,
Like
that's quite
purposeful.
distinct from like I rubbed against something and it felt good. Or like I
Yeah.
saw the dog even rubbing against
Yeah.
something, humping something.
Right.
Right. Like, so that's one of the questions that also in the I really have folks start with like, "Oh, where did you see that before? Where
Mm.
did you learn that? Or where did you hear that?" Or things like that, because that can be a huge, either relief or, I
Yeah.
need to ask some more questions here. But we want to really be able to ask that question in a way that starts really open and non-judgmental and not panicky,
Sure.
right? Because if I'm saying to my child, where did you hear that?
Yeah.
Where did that come from? They're already gonna shut down on
Right.
me, right? Like, I'm not getting any real information at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Versus like, "Oh, that looks funny. Where did you see that? Who
Right.
did that?"
Right.
It's a
Oh,
different
for
question.
sure. I mean, I remember giving my son a bath and him being like, I don't know, maybe 18 months old. And I was like, oh my gosh, he has an erection. Like, what is this? Why is it there? Like, because I had no idea. I was like 24 when I had my kid. And so, like, I'm looking at this and I grew up with a sister. Like, I didn't have any sharing baths with little boys or anything like that. So I had no idea. I was like, oh my God. But it's just a totally natural phenomenon and it's fine. And I had some friends who had a daughter who essentially masturbated and she would like hump a pillow or something like that. And she was a toddler, had
Lots of
no
kids do.
idea. And I remember them
Exactly.
telling me like
Really
they went to the
normal.
pediatrician and they're like, what is going on? Do we need to stop this? They said, no, just ignore it. She'll be done when she's done. And she doesn't know any better. She's not doing it because she's being sexual. She's doing it like what you said. It's just she did it one time and it felt good. And now she wants to feel good again.
Right. Bingo, exactly. And, as a sexologist who works mostly with adults, let me tell you, the kids who did that and did not get shamed for it and did not, suffer this sort of like, you're bad and your body's bad, we don't touch there, this kind of freak
Yeah.
out, tend to have much better adult sexual health outcomes than those of us who maybe had that experience of, especially for girls,
Yeah.
of don't touch there, it's bad,
Mhm.
it's gross,
Yeah.
off limits, you can't be familiar with this part of your body.
Right, right. Yeah, that's a tough message to sell. I think the way I tried to approach it, and tell me how you teach people to, but the way that I tried to approach it when my kids were littler was more like, your private stuff you touch in your bedroom and your bathroom. We don't touch in public or where other people are because number one, there's germs. And number two, that's a private thing that we don't need other people to see. But I didn't want it to feel bad. I didn't want to shame
Right.
them, but I wanted to kind of help direct them to where it's appropriate and where it's not.
Bingo. No, absolutely. That is right along the lines of what I encourage people to say. The only thing that I do like to add is that I try to talk about private stuff as a positive.
Mhm.
Right? Just add a little bit of positivity there because I use the word special a lot. Like,
Mm.
if this is private, not so much now, my kids are a bit older, but with younger ones, like, this is because it's special. It's just
Mm.
for you, right? And
Yeah.
not for anybody else. And made it feel a little bit more positive in that way because I think
Yeah.
sometimes it is important to say, "Hey, this is private. Hey, don't do this in the living room.
Yeah.
Don't do this at your friend's house," right? Like
Right. Right.
things like that. But I think that again, because I am who I am, because I see the effects of attitude on how this works for people in the long term, I really wanted to make it feel even less shameful and
Mhm.
more like, yeah, it's private. So that's great. Like, keep it special for
Yeah.
you kind of attitude because
I
that
love
felt
that.
so nice to
Yeah. No, that's amazing. So, all right. So we're starting those conversations. They're getting the puberty talks, things like that. So, all right, they're teenagers. They're dating. Like, how are parents supposed to handle those conversations? Because I know I sure don't want to be a grandma at 42 years old. So I know I've had these conversations with my kids, but it is scary. It is intimidating, especially, I mean, look, I work with penises and vaginas for a living. It's what I do every day. So for me, the vocab is a lot more normal. For people who don't, it's very intimidating to have these conversations with your kids.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is exactly why the entire premise of my program for parents is that they start early and keep it
Mm.
small and frequent.
Okay.
So when we ask, like going back to that question a bit about like, well, when do I start talking about the sexual stuff? Cool, Julia, we're talking about bodies, whatever. When do I move on to something else? How am I supposed to get from talking about that's your vulva to like, oh my God, you're going on dates and what's going to happen?
Right. Yeah.
And that answer is that we're doing it along the way. We're doing
Mm.
this all the time, essentially, because we have the opportunity to seize all of the little moments and all of the little questions instead of throwing everything into one big awkward horrible talk that everybody hates and you remember like two things from
Yeah.
because you were trying to hide the whole time. We're having
Yes.
smaller consistent conversations throughout their whole lives. So that means that okay, great, we learned about puberty together, but also, hey, let's take a look at that site again and see what other videos are up there. Cool, we
Mhm.
can do that together. We can when we're watching a show together or listening to a song together or anything like
Mhm.
that, any kind of media that we're seeing. Sometimes I have whole conversations with my kids because of a billboard that we
Yeah.
passed, right? Like bingo. Yes, let's talk about birth control.
Yeah.
And so the conversation of birth control when they are, 8 is, oh, that's something that somebody does to, let them decide when they're going to get pregnant so that
Mhm.
they can prevent a pregnancy, keep a pregnancy from happening, right? Make sure they're really understanding
Mhm.
my vocabulary and keep it simple and fact based and just answer any questions from there, right?
Yeah.
That's that conversation. But birth control, then a conversation at 13 is a different story. We're going to be adding a lot more details, a
Yeah.
lot more information about when that might apply to people. And one thing that, again, I'm like happy to share a whole bunch of the tricks from my course because you're still going to get stuff out of it if you get it. But one of the things that I really encourage parents to do is to talk about their friends
Mm.
and their potential friends' experiences. This is a way to make it less like, I'm telling you, you need to get birth control, or like,
Yeah. Yeah.
make it a little less awkward in that moment, as you can be like, I want you to know about this because even if you don't need this info right now,
Mm.
you're going to have friends who will need this info, and it'll be so cool that you have all this info.
I love that approach. I love that. Yeah, that's super important. I
Um,
mean, I think, with my kids, when their friends would come over, again, they know what I do for a living, so it makes me a little bit easier to talk to. They always have questions for me, and I try and meet them where they're at and things like that. And some of them are super silly, like, what's the biggest penis you've ever seen? And some of them are actually more important, like, when is this? What's oral sex? What is whatever? And some of that is really good because a lot of kids, like, and even when I was growing up, I would say you don't necessarily associate oral sex with having sex. It's almost like penetrative PNV sex is all these kids think about for their virginity. And they
right,
don't look at all these other aspects as actually part of sex. Well, that's foreplay. And there's this distinction that you're allowed to do as much foreplay as you want. But as soon as that PNV, then you've had sex. I don't really
right.
look at it that way anymore. Oral sex is extremely
Me
intimate.
neither.
You can definitely pass STIs oral sex wise. You can definitely have major good or bad experiences with just making out, having oral sex. It doesn't always have to be full on penetrative intercourse to have these experiences and need these communicative skills. And I think that was really lacking when I grew up. I'm trying to work on that with my own kids and such and their friends. But I think overall, do you see that that is still kind of a line of confusion?
Absolutely, definitely. And I think in some ways that's changing among younger people, especially as we start being able to talk more about being queer, being
Mhm.
gay, lesbian, bisexual, things like that. More types of different ways to connect and different
Mhm.
ways to be sexually intimate come into the conversation more. People are definitely talking a lot more about oral sex and even
Mhm.
anal sex,
Yep.
which again, when we're talking about it in this kind of older way that I think you and I probably both grew up with, of like, oh, that's not quite sex. Whoa, right?
Right.
Yes, yes, it is sex.
Yep.
Absolutely. This is a type of sex, and this is really vulnerable.
Mhm.
This is really potentially, can give different options, problems, all kinds of,
Mhm.
consequences. I try not to use the term consequences when I talk about sex and what happens, but just like, hey, results, right?
Yeah.
Like, these are some of the things that can happen. Yeah, I definitely think that that attitude of like, well, it's not, if it doesn't get me pregnant or it can't get anyone pregnant, then it's like less scary or less serious or
Yeah.
whatever. Careful. Let's definitely have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely think, like you're saying, like these smaller conversations. I remember watching my daughter and I watched all the reruns of Teen Wolf at one point in time, and it gave us some really great opportunities to talk about things because the teenagers have sex. I mean, I think back, like we had Dawson's Creek, right? And sleeping in the same bed, and they were just friends until they weren't just friends and things like that. Like my parents didn't take that opportunity when they were in the same room with me watching that show to say, I don't really agree with that, or what do you think about that, or how does that make you feel, or whatever. Whereas, like, I would literally pause the show and be like, whoa, that was intense. Like, what did you think? Like, how did that go or whatever? And I love that way of doing it. And like you said, songs and there's different ways of doing it. But in that moment, taking that example and being able to expound on it really worked well for me.
Exactly. And that's one of the easiest ways that we can add in these bits of conversation,
Mhm.
these nuggets of, wisdom and how to navigate the world, is like little conversations. Whoa, what did you think about that? Were
Yeah.
you expecting them to kiss just now? Like, he was kind of being a jerk. How did that happen? Like,
Yeah.
asking them first. And this one is sometimes even hard for me, even though I'm a professional in this. Sometimes I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm so taken aback by characters and what they're doing.
Yes.
Can you believe this?
Yeah.
Okay, try to tone that down if you can, because well, the note to self, right?
Yeah.
The more that we can check in with our kids and ask their reaction first,
Mhm.
the more we're going to get real information and those real conversations about what they're hearing other places, what
Yeah.
they're thinking about this. When I can be quiet and start with just asking them,
Mhm.
hey, what did you think about that? Huh?
Yeah.
What do you think about this character? What would you do? What would you tell a friend to do? These kinds of questions are gold
Yeah.
for starting real conversations that don't have to feel quite so awkward.
Sure, and developing that trust with your kid too, that they can talk to you about this stuff. Because a lot of kids, my friends' kids and such, will come to me and say, well, I can't talk to my mom about that. That's why I'm asking you. And I had that relationship. I didn't talk to my mom about that kind of stuff. That just wasn't talked about. And I really love what you're doing is kind of pulling back these layers to allow us to get to a point with our kids where there's a level of comfort and trust. So even if something weird happens, or you're not sure what a term means and you heard it, that you'll come talk to me instead of just jumping on the internet. That if you do happen to get a UTI, an STI, pregnant, whatever, you can come and talk to me and I might need a beat, but I'm there and I'm going to stay there with you and we're going to figure it out and we're going to work. What are a couple other tips that you can give parents in those? Holy shit, my daughter just told me that she needs to go on birth control, or my son just told me he had sex and his penis is like burning while he pees. Like, what can we do in those moments to allow that conversation to continue and to support our kid to keep coming to us?
Beautiful, hugely important question. Exactly. So, and I cover this more extensively in the course. There's a whole section for parents on taking care of yourself and responding to difficult moments. Because again, we know, and on de-shaming yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? I include a section around what we can do to work on our own shame and discomfort around sex and sexuality, because that's where a lot of this comes from,
Mm-hmm.
right? We as adults have stigma about teen pregnancy. We have stigma about, sexually transmitted infections. We have stigma around like, is our kid, having too much sex, or are they too sexual? Are they wearing too revealing clothing? Are
Mm-hmm.
they, right? Things like that. We have stuff that lives in us
Yeah.
that we're carrying around, that baggage. If we haven't looked at it yet, especially, then let's
Yeah.
take a moment. And so there are tools in my toolkit,
Okay.
in my course for parents, to look at your own stuff, to start to process through some of that as well. But that's in your own time,
Mm-hmm.
before or after your kids are in this moment where you're like, oh,
Yeah.
oh no. And so I have a different section where I talk about how to handle those difficult questions, how to handle that panic for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's some quick grounding practices I include,
Okay.
even of like, here's how you can cool
Yeah.
down and be able to approach this. And really, it's a lot of it is just about your attitude and honesty in the moment. So I don't mean honestly, like tell them exactly what you're feeling in great detail. I
Okay.
mean, you want to be clear that, like, whoa, I'm a little thrown off right now. This is not the best moment in the world that you could have told me, but I'm so glad you told me.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for bringing this to me. This is an important topic, right? I have a whole list of phrases you can use to really validate and appreciate the fact that they are coming to you
Mm-hmm.
with this issue, concern, question, problem, curiosity, whatever it is. So anytime you're thrown off and you're like, not prepared for this, legit, let them know, hey, I'm glad you're coming to me with this. Thank you for asking that. Or thank you for telling me. I need some time to get my answer together. I need some time to think this through. Let's talk about it on this date.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it tomorrow. Let's talk about it at
Mm-hmm.
dinner tonight. Let's talk about it this weekend, or whatever the case, depending on the situation. But set a time and come back to it. You don't want to leave them hanging, but just letting them know, hey, this is not off limits. I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad you came to me. I will revisit this with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not ready. It's okay to say that. It's okay to be human.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
great. Even.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's really important. I love this conversation. The one thing that we hadn't talked yet about that you mentioned earlier was porn. So before we wrap up, I want to talk about that because I think it's so prevalent and so easily accessed for these kids now that, how do parents talk about it? What do we do about it? Obviously, we know our kids are going to see it. I remember catching my kid Googling big boobs at like 8 years old, right? Like, it's out there. They're going to do it. They're going to see
Right.
it. So what do we do about that? How do we help them with that?
Yeah. So this is where I'm also going to share my very I'm a sexologist. I see this and work with this in adults all the
Yeah.
time. Maybe unpopular beliefs here, but here's what I know from researching this, from working with adults who are coming to me worried about their own porn use or their partner's porn use. Porn itself is not evil. Porn
Mhm.
itself is not like the end all be all problem. And so, first and foremost, if you discover your kid has been exposed to porn or your kid even is looking for porn, like, not the end of the world, but
Mhm.
it is important to handle it, to discuss it with them, to figure out what's going on. Partly because we want to know, for example, was this kid curiosity, right? Was this just big boobs when you're 8 because you've heard that phrase and you know what boobs are and they look kind of
Right.
cool and like you're starting to have hormones. It's interesting. That's just curiosity. Okay,
Mhm.
cool. Versus like some adult has showed them something.
Mm.
Ooh, totally different
Yeah.
scenario. Ooh, or some adult has asked them for something.
Mhm.
Totally different scenario. So that's where, again, we want to be really cautious in the attitude that we're using, our
Yeah.
tone of voice, our facial expressions, things like that, when we're asking about what's going on with our kids, because that can make a huge difference in knowing whether they need help and
Yeah.
support and some kind of potential intervention depending on who else is involved
Mhm.
versus like they're curious and I
Yeah.
want to guide them in this venture.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, you're right, kids are going to be exposed to
Mhm.
porn, some of them as young as 7 or 8. At
Mhm.
school, their friends Googled big boobs and
Yep.
showed it to them, whatever, right? Like, this is going to happen at some point in their lives. They're gonna hear the term from their
Mhm.
friends, they're gonna stumble upon it accidentally, they're gonna look for it
Mhm.
eventually. It's going to happen. So that's where I really encourage parents to get clear on what your messaging is about pornography,
Mhm.
right? And how you're going to approach that conversation. Because the reality is, if we know that they're going to be exposed to it, what we say about it and how we say it
Mhm.
is going to influence their future sexual health
Yeah.
so much. I work with so many people who feel have spent their whole lives feeling so ashamed of their sexuality, of their
Mhm.
masturbation, of what sexual desires they're interested in. And I personally don't want that for my child.
Right.
I don't want them to ashamed of their sexuality, of their fantasies, of their
Yeah.
desires. I do want them to be respectful to
Mhm.
themselves and others. I do want them to, right? I have a whole list and I have a guide in the program where I invite you to think about your values and what you want
Mhm.
to instill, what you hope to share with your children.
Yeah.
But so I got really clear on what's important to me as a parent, what I
Mhm.
really want to share with my child. And the main thing is about porn specifically, letting them know that this is not real,
Mhm.
that this is not what sex looks like
Yep.
in regular people's lives. This is not what their sex life is going to look like. This is not how people treat each other in relationships. This is not
Yes.
how people take care of each other sexually. This
Mhm.
is not even what pleasure looks like.
Yeah.
That, again,
Yeah.
talking about if I'm talking to an older teen, I'm gonna be like, "Look, anal sex doesn't happen like that. Like,
Right.
you can't put things in your butt randomly.
Right.
That's
Right.
not you don't
Yes.
just slide stuff in there, like, no." Right?
Well,
If I'm talking to
yes.
young kids and it's more a conversation of like, this is not how people discuss whether they're gonna have sex or not, right? Like, this is
Mhm.
not different conversations, but same idea. the
Yeah.
biggest thing is like, please don't let porn be your child's whole education about
Right.
sex. Please,
Yeah.
please. Like, I'm begging all of us who are parents.
Yeah, and it's so true because I have seen a huge influx of men in their knees and early 30s coming in with erectile dysfunction. There is nothing physiologically wrong with these guys in their 20s and early 30s that is causing this issue. It is porn. They are masturbating and watching certain types of intense porn, and then when they get to having sex with a partner, it's not like that. And so their body can't get to a release or can't get excited in the same way that it does because it's not the same visual stimulation that they're getting from certain types of porn or the overuse of porn, right? So those things. And so I think having these conversations when they are younger and setting them up for success that look, if you're curious and you want to know, you've heard of anal sex, you don't know what it is, sure. Okay. You watched something. It's just not real. That person's a professional. They have, all kinds of lubricants. They have camera there people that telling them exactly what angles to be at. They've got numbing stuff going on. Like it's not real. It's no different than watching a movie on TV or watching one of your video games that's not real. But if you're curious and you're using it to learn something or whatever, or get an idea of what a word meant that you heard somebody use, I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with the continued use where then it affects your actual sex life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and again, this is where we go back to this idea of what are we, not just what are we saying, but how are we saying
Mhm.
things? How are we approaching things? What kind of attitude are we sharing? And if we're parents who are afraid to let our kids know that sex is supposed to be pleasurable, for
Mhm.
example, right? That sex is supposed to feel good, then it's a lot harder to have that conversation of like, hey, porn can actually mess up your idea of how you think sex is supposed to go.
Mhm.
Porn can be helpful for some adults as brief moments of entertainment, right?
Mhm.
Like having these really nuanced conversations with teenagers, let's
Mhm.
say, is hard
Yeah.
because you have to have wrapped your head around to some extent, like your own stigma about pleasure and sex and
Mhm.
the shame and all of those things, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. It's an intense conversation. And I appreciate so much that this is one of your areas of focus because I think it is so needed. And parents need the tools. We didn't get the education, so we want to do better for our kids, but we don't quite know how. So I really appreciate this program. And this was such an important topic. I didn't want to cut it short. So we will have you back to talk about your other program. But before we wrap, I want to give you time to let people know about the programs you offer, how they can get in touch with you. So have your moment.
thank you for all this time. In general, though, I offer a few different classes or courses. I have some online workshops and things like that. This is one of them. So, my parent toolkit from Freeze to Flow is one of the classes that I offer. It is asynchronous learning online. So, do it at your own pace. There's videos, there's resources. You've heard a lot now today about the different aspects of what's offered in that course. So, again, I would love for you to take that. And I'm also happy to give a discount. We'll put that in the show notes, I'm sure, to give a
Yes.
discount to your listeners for that course. Other than that, I do a lot of one-on-one and couples coaching. That is the main place where I spend my time is one-on-one with folks or with couples. So I work with folks who are experiencing orgasm concerns, who are experiencing desire mismatch issues in relationships, lots of different aspects of sexual concerns, especially when we need some shaming, some
Yeah.
de-shaming, some unlearning of that negative messaging that we grew up with
Yes.
so that we can create new ideas of sexuality and joy and pleasure together. So I do a lot of that. And then the other really exciting program I'm so thrilled to talk about, I can't wait to come back and talk with you about it more in depth, is my program for couples who are 50 plus to really rekindle their relationship to feel like
Mm.
lovers again now and for the long haul. Because again, like I said in the beginning, no, I know from everything that I have been learning these past, 30 years, that we do express our sexuality. We can express our sexuality, our love, our joy, be in our body's pleasure from birth to death in different ways. And I really believe in that. So this program helps couples to really reconnect in ways that maybe they felt like are not possible anymore. Maybe they feel like they're not supposed to. Absolutely not. We
Yes.
can do this together. We can have long-term passion. So that's called a Rekindled Circle, and folks can reach out or find that information on my website as well.
Perfect. So we'll put all that in the show notes. And I love that program. I think it's great for, empty nesters, that age group where you're like maybe getting closer to retirement and you're like, okay, now we have all this time together and I have to decide whether or not I still like you and like find that fire again. So I absolutely love that program. And I appreciate your wealth of knowledge for talking to our kids. Thank you so much for being on here today. I really appreciate it. And you will be back soon.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I can't wait.
Absolutely. Everybody have a great week. Don't forget, if you want to work with me for your hormones or sexual health issues, you can find me over at reviveish.com. Have a great day and go have some fun between the sheets. Thank you for joining us and exploring sexual health topics here on Between the Sheets. New episodes are available every Wednesday. Please subscribe and rate our podcast so we can reach more listeners. And don't forget to tell your friends, partners, and anyone who will listen about Between the Sheets. Send any comments, questions, or stories to podcastbetweenthesheets@gmail.com. It's all one word, podcastbetweenthesheets@gmail.com. Thanks for listening and go have some fun between the sheets.